I feel like I don't have any legitimate power, to be honest, in my position at work. So I really rely on like reward power and expert power for other people to listen to what I'm saying and to follow what I tell them like needs to be done and why it needs to be done a certain way.
I mean, I work for Starbucks, so I work within a corporate structure. Um, so it can be harder to foster those other types of power. Um, I certainly try not to use coercive power. I don't think that many corporations promote coercive power, but we do structurally lean on the kind of short-sighted reward power system to forge a bit of a referent power that seems to go on like a social wavelength. So even though I'm using rewards, if I've been in my position long enough, and I think we've all had a boss who's kind of been like this, like you just maybe just enjoy this person outside, like you have a personal relationship with them, you like them, you can kind of like start transitioning that way, but that also works outside the corporate structure.
But I really think they try to avoid coercive power because they don't write people up like ever. Like it's very rare for somebody to get written up or fired for being written up. It's just a very rare occurrence. Like I've actually never seen it happen. And my managers have all told me, yeah, it's pretty much impossible to get fired from Starbucks. So I think a lot of corporations do stay away from coercive power.
I work for Starbucks too, and I started when I first started, it was like 10 years ago. And then I've been like on and off with them, and now I'm back with them. So for me, I think it's more like informational power. Like I have a lot of information just because I've been there for so long. So that new partners coming in or new employees, they kind of look to the partners that have been there for a long time for just like all the questions. I think that also kind of goes off of referent power, just like being they're looking again at the more tenured employees or partners to be their role model.
Referring most on referent power because there are so many different departments, there are so many different people that you're working with, and if you want to get anything done, you have to build the relationships with people. Instances with coercive power or just, legitimate power, like people will not really have a good reason to have you do something rather than they are a higher up or they're your boss. And so there can be a lot of like interdepartmental politics. First started working here, I couldn't get anybody to do anything until you build those relationships. So unfortunately, I wish there would be more instances of, rewards don't really work because, everybody has kind of their own agenda. And so there's not really, the reward system can't work because if you may be working with a team, but if they work under a different leader, they want a different reward, they want the recognition. So I think building relationships and referent power is something that I have the most experience with.
I don't have any kids. So when I'm dealing with someone else's kids, I really have no method and nothing to like lean on. So I use a lot of coercive behavior. I feel like I don't have the experience. I certainly don't know these kids very well, and I just know the basics of like, you either need to do this or not do this.
I was thinking about being a parent myself too. Again, the referent power comes in, just like, because my son is 3, he's almost 3, he watches me all the time. I see him or hear him repeat things that I say, whether it's good or bad, constantly. So he's always looking to me to be a role model.
My fiance has a little boy, and so he, if I try to get him to do something. I kind of use the reward leadership, and we had this, this conversation the other night, my fiance and I, and he said, well, you don't have to promise him rewards, you can just tell him to do something. He's like, I don't promise him rewards to do something. So he employs a different type of leadership, or, I can't do that though,
Disneyland this summer with family friends with a 4 and a 5-year-old. And as you can imagine, they were a handful. To get them in a better mood, I'd be like, oh, if you do this, I'll buy you a churro. Like, it was really easy to use like the reward power on like other people's children, but I think it's a lot different when it's your own child.
Leadership positions, and so I would like to think that when I am in more of a leadership position, I think that I would probably try to focus on leading through empowerment. That was one part of the chapter that I found really, useful to, share the power. There's less pressure. If you're going to be working with the team, have them, feel that they have a say in it, and have them be able to take the credit. And, in a group situation, it goes back to they have to have motivation. You have to have trust to get them to contribute. So that's what I think I would like to, that's the type of leader I would like to be, is lead through empowerment.
The breakdown of empowerment within leadership, and it kind of resonated with the whole transformational leadership subject that we talked about last week, because it really just seemed like a breakdown of those elements again, which are fostering ownership, finding motivation, and it did a much better job this time around about talking about the direct benefits towards, like, as a leader, you almost become safeguarded from failure if you give your power away more. That the natural, you raise job satisfaction, you raise performance levels, you raise ownership, you raise trust, and at the same time you raise innovation by kind of reducing authoritarian practices.
Like in terms of the types of power and like giving power away and using that sort of trust in people around you, like just giving control of the physical environment and the way that work is organized to sort of like the entire store, and having people give like a real voice in their store is sort of one of the best things you can do to just get everybody on the ground, because then we're all committed to just the way the store is run. And as far as like transformational leadership, just giving that sort of power away can make a big difference.
Interesting was uncertainty avoidance. I think the U.S. is pretty, I don't want to say reckless, but I want to say they take a lot more risk than any other, like than most countries. So they might have a really hard time dealing with companies like Japan and China and business deals, because in those countries they really want to be certain that things are going to work well, and they always have a very direct plan.
Power distance cultures, maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable with a boss that wants to build a relationship, like maybe the referent power wouldn't be effective for them. They're comfortable with somebody in authority who doesn't want to get too close to them. And so I think it's important to, and especially these days with so much business being conducted internationally,
Power distance. I mean, I know, like, yeah, how comfortable should you act around your superior, know, and here in the U.S. it's, the power distance is really low, so, you can be really cozy and close and friendly with your supervisor or superior, but I know in a lot of other countries, it's, if you were to act like that, it would be considered really disrespectful. So
every time I read about high context, low context cultures, I was in a relationship with someone for years from a very low context culture, or excuse me, a very high context culture. Culture shock was very, very real and very present all the time, even though it was happening here in the United States. And it was just very funny, like you had to adhere to a lot of super subtle traditions. Bring flowers for her parents, like I had to bring flowers for like every female member of the family, whether they were there or not. So I had to show up at the house with like a dozen bunches of flowers. So, you know, I mean, just meeting the parents was like and this is just the way it works. Now, mind you, that was in a very personal setting, but I have no doubt that translates into a professional setting or translates into any sort of leadership setting when dealing between those two cultures, because you kind of really have to walk that kind of tightrope of context and be like, is what I'm doing, is the message I'm giving out what I intend, or is it going to be interpreted a different way? The stakes in this case were just me being able to date their daughter, but the stakes in a professional case could mean a whole lot of money or your job.
Thing that I wrote about on the discussion board, like with my mother-in-law, she, you know, we both were raised here in the U.S. Very like low context personality. She's a big talker. She talks about everything in full detail all the time. I'm kind of more high context. I'm not a talker. Only during like assignments when I need to be, or, you know, whatever, but I'm usually pretty reserved. So I have to check myself when I'm with her to make sure that I'm not acting too cold. So it's funny how that can be it's just like personality wise, I feel like with high and low context, rather than it doesn't have to be big cultural differences. I feel like sometimes it's just with family to family. Just, I mean, how are you raised? So
my sister does software sales, and she travels a lot internationally for business. And one of the stories she was telling me, and it goes to whether the culture is a masculine or feminine culture. And she went to a country, and they thought that she was there to pour coffee. You know, she's like one of the higher ups in her company, and she it was actually in Mexico. They were talking to some TV station, and it was all men, and she was there to, you know, consult with them, and they wouldn't talk to her. They thought that she was there to pour the coffee, and so that could be you know, and she had done research beforehand, so she knew not to necessarily get offended. Just, you know, that's the way they're not used to seeing a woman, you know, in business. In the U.S., there's no, you almost have to treat it more as like an individual basis, because there are so many different types of people.
Like, I kind of feel bad for any country that has to, like, oh, what are we going to do with the U.S. today?
Any country that has to
I
deal
feel
with
bad for them, because most other countries are very exact and still follow their like cultures closely, and I think the U.S. is just kind of a wild card at this point. I started going to school because I was on campus for the first 2 years, and I think it was a culture shock in itself, because there was so much of every culture on the ASU campus. Like there's so many foreign exchange students. Like, you have people from Saudi Arabia, China, Japan, and Dubai, and I think it was a huge culture shock, because I had to get used to all of those cultures. And when I actually started working at Starbucks, the way they treat you is so different. Like, every single one of them, it's so different how each like culture treats you.
I mean, it's funny that you bring that up. One of the factors being, you know, environment, but there's so many. Cultures are not built based just on national boundaries either. There's, you know, a dozen major geographical subcultures within the U.S.